My mother introduced me as the family failure in front of 12 wealthy guests. 10 minutes later, the man she was trying to impress would learn I had already bought the neighborhood he came there to destroy. But first, she finished her sentence. "And this," she said, placing her hand on my arm without looking at me, "is my younger daughter, Helena. She has always preferred a quieter life, a simpler path." She said it like a compliment. That was the thing about Celeste Harrington. She never raised her voice. She never had to. I stood in the entrance of that dining room in a navy dress, my hair pinned, back a bag that had seen better years over my shoulder, and I watched 12 people evaluate me in the space of 3 seconds. The woman with diamonds at her throat looked once and looked away. A man in a gray suit smiled the way. People smile at children when they've said something charming but incorrect. My mother guided me to my seat near the end of the table, next to Aunt Ruth, and a woman I didn't know, and returned to the center of the room, where she belonged, where she had always belonged. I set my bag on the floor, unfolded my napkin, and kept my face perfectly still. Because what my mother did not know, what no one at that table knew, was that 4 hours earlier, my attorney had finalized the last of the transactions. The Marlowe Promise Foundation now held legal title to 72% of the PM residential and commercial properties in Willow Creek, the project that Malcolm Sterling had been building toward for 3 years. The one he had come to this dinner to celebrate was already over. He just didn't know it yet. I was not there to announce it. Not yet. I was there because the man my mother was honoring that evening had spent months pressuring elderly residents out of their homes, and I needed to be in the room. When that came to light, my sister Bianca arrived 20 minutes late in a green dress that cost more than most people's rent and moved through the room like she had rehearsed it. Gregory followed, shaking hands before anyone offered one. Bianca reached me and paused. "Helena." She looked at my outfit the way people look at something they've already decided about. "You look." She let the silence do the work. "Comfortable." "You look well, Bianca," I said. Gregory came over, squeezed my shoulder like we were old friends, and said, "You ever find something steady, work-wise?" Not cruel exactly, just the assumption, stated plainly, that the answer was no. "I manage," I said. He nodded and moved on. Dinner began. Celeste orchestrated the room the way she always did, redirecting conversations, positioning people, making sure the right guests felt important. Malcolm Sterling sat near the head of the table, broad, confident, the kind of man who never learned to read a room because the room always bent toward him. Midway through the first course, my mother raised her glass and delivered what she called a welcome. She spoke about family, about legacy, about what it means to build a name worth passing down. And then, with a warmth that held a blade inside it, she said, "Helena always had a beautiful heart. It's just that a heart alone doesn't build. A reputation." She smiled at the table. Some of us understand that earlier than others. A few guests nodded. Bianca smoothed her napkin. Gregory looked at Malcolm. I set down my fork. I breathed. I had practiced this. Not the words, there were no words, just the breathing. Just the discipline of holding something still inside you when everything in your body wants to move. I had driven 4 hours to sit at that table. I had come knowing exactly what my mother would say, knowing exactly how my sister would look at me. And still, when the sentence landed, I felt it the way I always felt it, not like a slap, like a door, closing. The difference, this time, was that I didn't need the door to open. I already had what I came for. My mother thought I was there to be endured. She didn't know she had invited the woman who had just made the most powerful man in the room irrelevant. But that was all right. She would know soon enough. There is a story my mother tells about me that ends before it begins. In her version, she raised two daughters with everything they needed. One of them understood the world. The other one didn't. The other one made difficult choices, had inconvenient values, and ended up living a life Celeste Harrington couldn't explain at dinner parties without a small apologetic smile. I was the other one. I learned that early, not from one moment, but from 100 small ones. The way she lowered her voice when she described my work to her friends, the way she positioned Bianca at every event like a centerpiece and placed me near the edge like something decorative but unnecessary. Bianca's accomplishments were currency. Mine were hobbies that hadn't matured into something real. My father was different. Arthur Marlowe was a quiet man with a reader's patience and the kind of attention that made you feel sane without performance. He used to find me in the kitchen late at night, both of us unable to sleep, and we would talk about nothing that mattered and everything that did. A street he'd walked that used to be beautiful. A book I was reading. The idea that some buildings should be saved, not because they were grand, but because people had lived in them and loved them. He died when I was 20, and the house stopped having that quality of his attention. It became only Celeste's house then, and in Celeste's house, there was a clear understanding of who deserved to take up space. I was 22 when I left. It was my birthday dinner. I had been offered a position with a nonprofit in Atlanta community housing, eviction prevention, the kind of work that doesn't photograph well but changes people's actual lives. I told my mother at the table. I thought, one more time, that she might see it. She looked at me with 12 people present and said, "You will never be someone this family can be proud to introduce." The table went quiet. Ruth's hand found mine underneath it. Bianca looked at her wine. My mother picked up her fork like the sentence had cost her nothing. I left 2 days later. A duffel bag, 3 boxes of books. I didn't say goodbye. I sent Ruth a text that said I was fine, which was not true but would eventually be. What came next took years. A fold-out table in a one-room apartment in Atlanta. 2 failed grants, then a successful one. The slow work of building trust with communities that had been let down by enough people with clipboards and good intentions that my clipboard and good intentions meant almost nothing at first. I had to earn it. I had to stay. I had to show up in the same place long enough that people stopped wondering when I was going to leave. The Marlowe Promise Foundation grew the way real things grow, not quickly, not glamorously, but with a kind of weight that accumulates until one day you look up and realize it can hold something. Scholarships, community clinics, eviction, defense, property acquisition in neighborhoods that were being quietly targeted by developers who understood that low-income homeowners often don't know what their land is worth. By 30, we were in 6 cities. By 32, the Marlowe Renewal Group had closed its first major urban development contract. Ethical development, permanent, affordability, community ownership structures. The kind of language that sounds idealistic until you see what it actually builds. I did not seek coverage. I used representatives in public settings. I let the foundation's name carry more weight than mine. Not from shame, from strategy. I understood that visibility attracts interference, and I wasn't ready for interference until the work was done. The work in Willow Creek had been 18 months. Quiet purchases, patient negotiations, title transfers that nobody linked together until they were all recorded in the same afternoon. My mother didn't know any of it. She thought she was seating me near the edge of her table because that was where I belonged. She was about to find out what I had been building in the years she hadn't looked. And the man at the head of her table, the man she had invited to make the family look powerful, was about to find out that the woman he had called sentimental money had already taken the ground beneath his project. Malcolm Sterling began talking about Willow Creek, the way men like him always talk about places they plan to erase, with enough reverence to seem thoughtful, and enough distance to make clear he felt nothing at all. A neighborhood with genuine history, he said, that has been allowed, through neglect, to fall well below its potential. He used words like revitalization and investment and community benefit. He described 500 new housing units, a hotel, retail space. He said the city council was close to aligned. He said that several current residents had already expressed willingness. I watched him from my end of the table. I watched Celeste listen with her hands folded and her expression arranged into engaged interest. I watched Bianca nod. I watched Gregory position his chair 2 inches closer to Malcolm's end of the table, the way people move toward light they want to be seen in. Adrian Cole, 3 chairs from me, was very still. He had a glass of wine in front of him that he had barely touched. He asked Malcolm 2 questions over the course of 10 minutes, both of them soft and open, the kind that sound like conversation and function like rope. Malcolm took it all. Then Gregory said something that changed the evening. He was describing the community outreach, how his team had been making contact with longtime residents, identifying who might be open to selling. He used the phrase willing participants. He mentioned, with the particular ease of a man among people he trusted, that some residents required a different approach. People like Mrs. Holloway, he said, 74 years old, sitting on a corner lot she's owned since 1983. She doesn't understand what that land is worth now. She doesn't need to. She just needs to believe she's getting a fair chance before the window closes. He said this at a dinner table, with a journalist 3 seats away. I picked up my water glass. I set it down. I said, quietly, "What kind of offer did she receive?" Gregory looked at me the way men like Gregory look at women like me, with patience that is not patience but tolerance. "A reasonable one," he said. "Was she represented by an attorney?" My mother's voice came in like a hand on a shoulder. "Helena, this isn't the moment. I'm asking a simple question about a woman in her 70s. You are making our guests uncomfortable." I looked at my mother. I let a beat pass. "I apologize," I said, which was not an apology. I looked back at my plate, but that was the thing about Gregory. He should have let it go there. Instead, emboldened by my silence, he continued softer now, for the table, but still, within Adrian Cole's reach, explaining that some residents, especially older ones, respond better to urgency than information. That a time-limited offer, framed correctly, moves faster than one that invites questions. Malcolm nodded. The market doesn't wait for everyone to feel ready. Adrian wrote nothing down. He didn't need to. His recorder had been running since the soup course, and across the table, Nora shifted almost imperceptibly in her chair. She glanced at me once. I gave her nothing back. But something had just been set in motion that neither Malcolm nor Gregory would be able to undo. And it wasn't what Gregory had said. It was the recorder that had been sitting in Adrian Cole's jacket pocket since before the soup course arrived. Dessert arrived, and with it, the version of the evening my mother had been building toward all night. Celeste raised her glass. She thanked her guests. She spoke beautifully, the way she always spoke beautifully, the years of practice visible in every sentence, every pause, every smile that arrived at exactly the right moment. Bianca has always represented what this family stands for, she said. She understood early that a life worth living is a life that can be seen, that the choices you make are also a statement about who you are. She looked at Bianca, who received the attention like she had been waiting for it all evening. Then Celeste turned to the table with a smaller smile. Some people, she said, and the room understood she was not speaking to anyone in particular, which was precisely the point, confuse simplicity with virtue because they were never quite able to reach for more. And I don't say that unkindly. I say it as a mother who has accepted her children as they are. The table absorbed this. A few people nodded in the sympathetic way of people who assume they understand the subtext. Ruth set down her fork. I did not. Bianca seized the opening the way she always seized openings, smoothly, with that particular smile that looks generous from the outside. She turned to me and said, Helena, I was telling someone recently about what you do, and I genuinely couldn't explain it. What is it exactly? For work. I run an organization, I said. What kind? Community development. Nonprofit? She made the word sound like a category of polite failure. Partly. She tilted her head. And that sustains you? Financially, I mean, she said. It's softly, like concern. I only ask because I worry. You never let any of us help. And I look at that bag, Helena, and I think about what you could have had if you had made different choices. She looked at my bag. A few people at the table looked too. That bag had been through more cities than Bianca had visited. It had sat in county records offices, hospital waiting rooms, community meetings that ran until midnight, a courtroom in Memphis where we won an eviction case that protected 47 families. But what Bianca saw was where? What the table saw was a POW, woman who couldn't afford better. That was fine. Let them see what they expected. It was easier to move in a room where no one was watching you carefully. Gregory, confident now, warmed by the wine and the company of a man he wanted to impress, said to Malcolm, You know what the most underestimated skill in this business is? Reading people. Knowing who will hold on and who, with the right conversation, will see things your way. Always, Malcolm agreed. Mrs. Holloway had a number in her head, Gregory said. We just had to replace it with ours before she had a chance to talk to anyone who might give her a different one. He said it like strategy, like wisdom. Adrian Cole turned one page in the small notebook beside his wineglass. I looked at Nora. She had her phone face down on the table, one hand resting over it. We were close now. My mother still thought she was running the evening. She was still performing. She didn't know that the man she had spent all night trying to impress had already lost, and that the woman she had spent all night trying to diminish was the reason why. There is a moment in every room like this one where the person who has been underestimating you reveals exactly how much. Malcolm Sterling reached it when someone asked him about the competing offer on the Willow Creek properties, the anonymous foundation that had been quietly making acquisitions in the area. He had mentioned it earlier in the evening, in passing, as a minor inconvenience. Now, wine comfortable and surrounded by people he considered allies, he decided to be more specific. Whoever is behind that foundation has no concept of how development actually functions, he said. You can buy residential lots and tell yourself you're protecting something, but without commercial anchor properties, without the main corridor, you don't have a project. You have sentiment. He shook his head. Sentimental money runs out. Real capital waits it out. Adrian said, "Do you know who controls the foundation?" Anonymous, technically. Some kind of trust structure. Malcolm waved a hand. "It doesn't matter. What matters is the city has a decision to make, and the very math on my side is considerably more persuasive." He was very confident when he said this. He had not yet checked his phone. Gregory, 2 seats away, was explaining to the man beside him how his team had handled the Holloway situation, specifically how they had created urgency. By telling her the offer was only valid for 72 hours, how they had advised her that an attorney would cost more than the difference would gain. How she had signed the letter of intent without representation. He called it streamlining the process. He called it that in front of Adrian Cole. Adrian reached into his jacket and turned off his recorder. He didn't need more than he had. Then Nora's phone lit up. She looked at the screen. Her expression didn't change. She was good at that, which was why I had hired her, but she looked up and met my eyes across the table. She mouthed 2 words. "It's done." I breathed in. Slowly. The way you breathe when something you have spent 18 months building becomes real in a single moment. I did not smile. I did not look at Malcolm. I did not look at my mother. I picked up my glass, took a sip of water, and set it back down. And then I waited for the doorbell. Malcolm needed Willow Creek to build his empire. I had already taken Willow Creek off the table. He just didn't know it yet, but in about 4 minutes he would. The thing about a room full of people who believe they know exactly what is happening is that they can feel it when they're wrong before they understand why. Something changed in the last 20 minutes before Victor arrived. I couldn't have named it for them, but they felt it. The quality of my silence, maybe. The way I had stopped reacting to anything Bianca said. The way my posture had settled into something that was not defeat and was not defiance, but was something they didn't have a word for because they had never seen it in me before. Malcolm's phone lit up on the table beside his coffee cup. He read the message. Read it again. His expression did not collapse. Men like Malcolm don't collapse in rooms like this, but something recalibrated. Something beneath the surface shifted. The way bedrock shifts when water finds a way through. He looked at Gregory. Gregory looked at his phone. Neither of them spoke, which told me everything. Celeste noticed the shift and did what Celeste always did. She redirected. She pulled the table's attention toward a story about a recent trip, toward Bianca's most recent project, toward anything that kept the room in her control. She was extraordinary at this. I had grown up watching her do it. But she couldn't redirect what was coming because she didn't know it was coming. She was still performing. She thought the evening was still hers. It was the last mistake she would make that night. Ruth's hand found my arm. She leaned close. "You ready?" she said quietly. "I've been ready for 12 years," I said. Then the front door opened. My mother was still smiling at the table, still holding the room, still in control of every surface of that evening. She had no idea that the next person to walk through her door was going to say my name in a way that would change everything she thought she knew about who I was. Victor Langley walked through my mother's front door with the unhurried certainty of a man who has never needed to raise his voice to be heard. He was carrying a leather portfolio, dark suit, no tie, the kind of presence that says, "I am not here to impress you. I am here because something is being concluded." Celeste intercepted him in the foyer. I could see them from the dining room. Her body language controlled but tight, the way it gets when something has arrived that she doesn't understand. She said something, he answered. She looked past him toward me with an expression I had seen before, the expression she reserved for moments when she believed I had done something that was going to require explaining. She came back to the doorway. "Helena," she said, her voice careful. "Did you invite an attorney to my home?" "I asked him to come, yes." "Are you in some kind of trouble?" She said it quietly, but not quietly enough. Two guests turned. "Because if you've brought your problems into my house, he's not here about a problem," I said. Victor came to the dining room entrance. He looked at the table. He looked at me. "Miss Marlowe," he said, "I apologize for the hour. The final filing's cleared this afternoon, and I wanted to confirm receipt in person." My mother looked from him to me and back. She still hadn't connected the name. That was the thing. I had been Helena Marlowe my whole life. But in this house, in my mother's mind, I was always the daughter, the lesser one. The name didn't carry weight yet. It was about to. Victor set the portfolio on the sideboard and opened it. He looked up at the room. "I represent the Marlowe Promise Foundation. As of 3:47 this afternoon, the foundation completed its acquisition of 72% of the residential and commercial properties in the Willow Creek district of Savannah, Georgia." He paused. "Miss Helena Marlowe is the founder and president of the foundation. She is also the majority owner of the Marlowe Renewal Group, which holds the development rights on the acquired properties." He said it the way you read a title deed, simply, factually. The room went completely silent. Not the polite silence of a dinner party, the silence of a room that has just been handed information it cannot immediately process. I watched my mother's face do something I had never seen it do before. The composure didn't leave all at once. It left the way light leaves a room in stages, from the edges first. She looked at me, and for the first time in 34 years, she did not look like she was managing me. She looked like she was seeing me. Bianca said, "What?" Not her usual Bianca voice-controlled cutting, just the word, plain and confused. Gregory stood up, his chair scraped. He said my name like a question. Malcolm Sterling picked up his phone and looked at whatever message he had received earlier with different eyes now. The color that had risen in his face earlier was different from the color that had left it now. He looked at me across the table, and I let him look. I didn't look away, and I didn't perform anything. I just let him understand what he was seeing. Victor continued, "The Foundation's charter prohibits sale or redevelopment of acquired properties under terms that would displace current residents, given that Mr. Sterling's project as filed requires access to approximately 68% of the properties now held by the Foundation. The project cannot proceed in its current form." Let me be plain about what that meant. Malcolm Sterling had spent 3 years planning a luxury development that required Willow Creek to exist as he imagined it: open, available, purchasable. His hotel, his condominiums, his retail corridor, none of it worked without the land. And 72% of that land now belonged to a foundation whose charter made it legally impossible to sell or redevelop under his terms. Malcolm needed Willow Creek to build his empire. I had already taken Willow Creek off the table. Before I ever sat down at my mother's dinner, Malcolm said, "That's not how was this not disclosed?" "All transactions are a matter of public record," Victor said, "filed individually, over 18 months through proper legal channels. Verifiable at the county records office." Adrian Cole had stopped writing. He was looking at me, not with surprise. I had reached out to him weeks ago, given him the framework without the ending, told him to be at this dinner if he wanted the final chapter. He understood now what chapter this was. He reached into his jacket and turned his recorder back on. Celeste took one step toward me. Her voice was very quiet. "Helena, are you done?" I looked at my mother. I thought about the night I left, the sentence at the table that had followed, Me for 12 years. The version of me she had been introducing all evening, simple, small, the daughter who didn't quite make it. I protected 73 families, I said. That's what I've done. The room had nothing left to say, but we weren't finished. Malcolm left first, but not quietly. He stood up. He buttoned his jacket with the particular precision of a man, recollecting himself. Then he looked at me and said, I will have my attorneys review every one of those transactions by morning. If there is any irregularity, any procedural gap, any filing discrepancy, we will pursue this in court. I have relationships with every city official involved in this project, and I promise you, the planning review process has not concluded. He said it like he was accustomed to that sentence-ending conversations. Victor looked at him. Mr. Sterling, he said, with the patience of someone who had anticipated this. Exact response. The Foundation's legal standing on these acquisitions is airtight. Every title transfer was filed through proper channels and is a matter of public record. Additionally, the Foundation has documented evidence of coercive offer practices used against unrepresented residents, including a false 72-hour deadline communicated to Mrs. Beatrice Holloway, an offer submitted at 38% below the current assessed value of her property, and an active discouragement of legal counsel. We also have an audio recording of statements made this evening describing those practices explicitly. He paused. If your attorneys would like to review our files, we welcome that. We have nothing to hide. I suspect the same cannot be said for everyone at this table. The room was absolutely still. Malcolm said nothing for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone, put it in his pocket, and walked toward the door. He did not say goodbye to Celeste. He did not look at Gregory. He did not look at me. He just left. The other guests filtered out in the quiet, careful way of people who have witnessed something they weren't meant to and don't know the right register for. The drive home. The woman with the diamonds pressed my mother's hand at the door. Celeste smiled and thanked her, and closed the door and stood in the foyer for a moment with her back to the room. When she turned around, the performance was gone. Adrian Cole came to me before leaving. He shook my hand. He said, the story about Mrs. Holloway, the unsigned attorney disclosure, the false deadline, the letter of intent signed under pressure that's going to matter. I know, I said. That's why I sent you the records in February. He nodded. I'll have it filed by Monday. He paused. The recording of Gregory is clear, all of it. He left. Gregory was still at the table. He had his phone in his hand, but he wasn't looking at it. Bianca sat beside him, her green dress suddenly looking like something she had chosen for a different evening. She looked at me. You've been planning this for about 18 months, I said. The decision to come tonight was more recent. You came to humiliate us. I came because your husband was helping a developer pressure elderly women out of their homes. I kept my voice level. Bianca, you texted Gregory in February. You called the Willow Creek residents deadweight. She went very still. I'm not using it tonight, I said, but I want you to know that I know. She looked away. Gregory said nothing. He was already inside, whatever calculation he was making, about the conversation he would need to have with an attorney. Not Victor. Someone else. That was when Ruth came to me. She had been quiet all evening the way Ruth is quiet, not removed, but conserving something for the moment that needed it. She came now, carrying a small wooden box with a brass clasp. Old. I recognized it from my father's desk. She held it out. He gave this to me 8 months before he died, she said. He told me to keep it until you were ready. He said I'd know when. I took the box and sat down at the far end of the now empty table. The letter was handwritten. Arthur's handwriting careful, slightly left-tilted, the penmanship of someone who believed that how you wrote something said something about how seriously you meant it. He had written, Helena, you will wonder, for years, why the people who should have seen you clearly could not. I want to tell you that failure belonged to them, not to you. Of all the people in this family, you are the one who will build something that survives our name. Not because you are the loudest or the most ambitious, though you may be both, but because you are the one who cares about people when no one is watching. That is the rarest thing I know. Your mother will understand this late. Don't hold it against her longer than you need to. I am proud of you. I have always been. I folded the letter. I held it in both hands for a moment. Then I looked at Celeste. She was standing near the window, not looking out of it anymore, looking at me. I said, You knew this existed. It wasn't a question. She didn't answer right away. She looked at the box in my hands, then at the letter, then at me. Something in her face was working very hard to hold itself together. He told me he'd written something for you, she said. He gave it to Ruth. Before he went into the hospital the last time, he told me what it said. I asked her to wait. For how long, I said. She didn't answer. Mama, for how long? I thought. Her voice broke, just slightly. Not from grief, from the particular shame of being seen in a truth you've carried alone. I thought if you had that letter, you would stop needing me completely. You were already pulling away. After he died, you were already going. And I thought if you knew what he said, how much he believed in you, you wouldn't need anything from me anymore. The room was very quiet. I held the letter in both hands and I looked at my mother and I felt something. I hadn't expected to feel that evening. Not anger. Something older than anger. Something that had been waiting a long time to be named. You didn't hide it from me to hurt me, I said. You hid it because you were afraid. She didn't deny it. But what you took from me, I said, and my voice was steady because I needed it to be steady, was the last thing my father ever said. The last proof that someone in this family looked at me clearly. You kept that from me for 12 years. She sat down. I had never seen my mother simply sit down in the middle of a room before. Without preparation, without arrangement, she looked for the first time like the size she actually was. She said, Who have you become? I looked at her for a long moment. The same person I always was, I said. You just never wanted to see her. I put the letter in my bag. The same bag Bianca had looked at. The same bag that had been through more rooms than this one, carried more weight than anyone at this table had ever acknowledged. I turned to go. Celeste said, Helena, please. I stopped. Maybe, she began. Maybe we could. Not tonight, I said. Not here. I kept my back to the room. If you want to, talk honestly, without performance, I'll listen. Some other time. In a room, without an audience. I didn't wait for an answer. I walked through my mother's house for what I hoped was the last time in a long time, past the flowers cut fresh that morning, past the crystal that caught the light, past all the careful arrangements she had built to make people believe she had the life she wanted. And I went outside into the savannah night, which smelled like jasmine and old, and I stood on the porch for just a moment and let myself breathe. Nora was by the car with coffee she had acquired from somewhere I had stopped, asking how she managed these things, and she handed it to me before I had to ask. How are you? She said. I thought about it. I'm okay. I actually am. Ruth came out behind me and took my arm, and we stood there for a moment in the kind of quiet that is not empty, but full of everything that had just happened and everything that didn't need to be said about it. Then Ruth said, "He would have loved watching that room go silent." I almost laughed. He really would have. We got in the car. Nora updated me on the calls that had come in during the last hour of the dinner. The planning board had been notified. Victor had sent the relevant filings to the Fines City Attorney's Office. Malcolm's project would require a full review before any further action could be taken, a review that, given the Foundation's ownership, stake, and Adrian's story, would be considerably more scrutinized than Malcolm had planned for. Gregory's name was now attached to a documented pattern of coercive tactics against an elderly, unrepresented homeowner. That was the kind of thing that had professional consequences. We drove through the older parts of Savannah, through the squares and the oak trees, and the Spanish moss that hung from every branch like the city was always in the middle of something it wasn't ready to explain. Then the streets changed. Narrower, quieter, less polished, the kind of streets that don't show up in the photography that makes people want to move somewhere. Willow Creek. There was a light on in the Provisional Community Center, a converted storefront the Foundation had been using as a base while the permanent plans developed. Through the window, I could see people. Not many, maybe 10. Some of them I recognized. Nora said they heard the acquisition cleared. Some of them wanted to wait up. I got out of the car. I pushed open the door, and the conversations inside stopped. 10 people looked at me, not with the evaluating look of my mother's dinner table, with something different. Something that asked without words whether the thing they had been afraid of was actually over. Mrs. Beatrice Holloway was there, in a blue cardigan, hands in her lap, sitting very straight, the way people sit when they have been carrying something and I haven't put it down yet. She looked at me and said, "Is it done?" "It's done," I said. "The properties are secured. The project can't go forward. Nobody is being moved." She nodded slowly. She didn't cry. She just nodded the deep, settling nod of someone who has been waiting for a long time for permission to stop holding their breath. A man near the back said, "What happens now?" "Now we build," I said. And we sat down together and we talked about it, about the community center, the permanent one, which would carry my father's name, about the clinic, about the after-school program, about the way the corner lot on Reston Street could be restored without removing a single family, about what this neighborhood had been and what it could become, not in a developer's rendering, but in the reality of the people who had lived in it and intended to go on living in it. Somewhere across the city, my mother was in a house full of flowers and crystal and very clean silence. Somewhere, Malcolm Sterling was on a phone call that was not going well. Somewhere, Gregory was figuring out the shape of what the next few weeks were going to look like. Somewhere, Bianca was sitting with a version of herself she had not agreed to examine. None of that was mine to carry anymore. Here, Mrs. Holloway was telling me about the fig tree behind her house that had been there since her husband planted it in 1987. She wanted to put in a garden in the spring. A man named Eli had a sketch on his phone of what the community entrance could look like. 2 women from the east side were talking about the tutoring program they had been trying to start for 3 years. My father used to say that the places with the most need were usually the places people were most careful not to look at directly. He said the discipline was to look anyway, to sit in the difficulty, to stay long enough that the difficulty became something else. I had been doing that for 12 years. My mother spent a lifetime trying to place me at the right table, in the right room, beside the right people. She spent 12 years mourning that I wouldn't sit where she put me. She never understood that I had already found the room that mattered. It wasn't the one with the crystal and the flowers. It was this one. Ruth sat beside me and found my hand, the same way she had found it the night. I was 22, and the door in my chest was closing. I held on. Outside, Savannah kept being Savannah, warm and complicated, and full of its own quiet contradictions. Inside, in a room without chandeliers or dinner, settings or people managing each other's impressions, I was where I had always been going. I was exactly where I belonged. My mother spent her whole life trying to put me in my place. That night, I finally understood. My place was never at her table. It was in the street I helped save,